afternoon. Hi, my name's Mark. I work at Philips. Who has heard of Philips? Good, good, good. A company that invented stuff, usually for consumers, and very diverse. And that's also what Philips was for a very long time. Now, today, Philips is quite a different company. It is still a company that invents stuff, but over the course of the many years that we've been around, we've had to change to a company that is now laser focused on improving quality of life and really using that ability to innovate to improve people's lives. And we've also made that our mission. So by 2025, we want to have improved the lives of 3 billion people by bringing innovation in a very sharp, focused strategic area. So no longer is it a company that is active in many different businesses, but it's a company that's much more focused on what we call health technology, improving people's lives by living healthy, preventing, diagnosing, and treating people. And also that much more sharp focus from being a wide conglomerate active in many different things to being a company that has a much more singular focus, mattered in what type of talent we wanted to create and wanted to build. So when I look at our talent evolution, we used to have quite a traditional talent approach, so-called high potential approach, with the idea that we would identify people young when they were in the circle, push them up to where they could lead all of these businesses that we were in. And we had one general manager profile, so a singular type of general manager that we tried to identify and then tried to develop. We used competency-based assessment, so we said Philips has leadership competencies. We tag people early on. If they have those competencies, then they probably will become good leaders. We earmarked them, so if you had that, there was a procedure to nominate, and then you got earmarked as a high potential. Went into the program where we had a structured, standardized development program, prescribed career paths. So we said, if you want to be a general manager in Philips, you have to do multiple businesses, multiple regions, multiple functions. And if you have this 2 by 2 by 2, it would make you the perfect general manager. Sounds pretty good, right? And then we had dedicated talent brokers. So we had dozens of people in HR talking to talent, trying to move these talents in the pool from one business to the other, from one function to the other, from one region to the other. So on paper, perfect, right? It was by the book talent management. Everybody loved it. The people that were in it loved it, and the people that were, the managers that were working with it also loved it. But then, when we did the math, actually it didn't really work that well. So when we looked at the people that were in the pool moving up, more than half the people weren't moving up, or weren't moving up in an accelerated way. When we looked at the leadership positions that we were trying to fill, the critical positions that were driving our company's success, a lot of those roles weren't filled by people from that pool. Right? So from both angles, we actually saw that even though we loved the program, it didn't really work for us. And we started to wonder why. How come that a program that looks so good doesn't really work? So the first thing that we discovered is that we don't have a one-size-fits-all general manager assignment. Right? We have many different types of challenges. And these challenges are so specific that you can't fit this one-size-fits-all leader into them. So what was a one-size-fits-all became a one-size-fits-none. And thus, people would not qualify for the roles that we had. We also noticed that competencies are not the best predictors. Competencies are okay for development, for performance in role right now. But to say if someone is in an individual contributor role and you rate them on competencies, is that a good predictor for them being a good leader 10 years into the future? Not really, right? We didn't really have the psychological validity, but also the way the process worked was that, you know, if I was in your team and you liked me, then you wanted to give me the reward of becoming a high potential. Right? So you started to reverse engineer the process to make sure that I qualified as a high potential, even though I was maybe just a great assistant to you, but not a great future leader. So that predictive validity wasn't great. And we only had a very small group of people actually being in that pool. So if you looked at the total scope of Philips, a lot of people were not getting a lot of attention. And these were really, these people weren't doing nothing. They were super valuable to the company, and we wanted to be more inclusive in terms of development. Now, if there are learning people here, we know by now that standardized development is not the most effective way. Right? People develop in different ways. For you and me to become a CIO, CEO, we have different paths because we have different starting points, different learning preferences. So the best way for the company to facilitate and accelerate that path is actually differentiated. And our standardized development didn't work effectively for everyone. We also saw that even though we had 2 by 2 by 2 on paper, the people that were actually progressing weren't ticking off the 2 by 2 by 2. Right? There were lots of people that did the 2 by 2 by 2 and then didn't move up or across. And then were people that moved up and they didn't have 2 by 2 by 2. And they were still successful. Right? So that sent the wrong message to all the people about the program, but it also showed us maybe we don't need that. Maybe it's not so relevant that you have this broad experience and other things are more relevant. And then lastly, all these talent managers. Great to have them because we love talking to them. It's great if someone wants to talk to you about your career. But when we talked about moving people from medical devices to consumer marketing, you can talk to HR all you want, but those people aren't moving, right? Because you want someone to really understand consumer marketing. And if they come from health, whatever, yeah, that's kind of a big risk. So I would rather go with the guy or the girl that has the exact experience that I need. And this is where that context of Philips came back, right? So, while we were changing, everything that was labeled the Philips way wasn't seen as, super powerful. So the fact that I was a Philips high potential from healthcare didn't mean so much to you in consumer lifestyle. Right? So the brand devaluated, if you like. So those talent managers, big investment for Philips, didn't really pay off. Because the decision-making to move these people around wasn't being done by the talent managers. Interesting, right? So then what? Right? So we wanted to become more inclusive, have a more integrated talent strategy, focused on the key things that matter for us. So one is be much more aligned to what your business is doing. Make sure that you have the right leaders to drive your business. Means you need to understand what your business does and how you identify leaders in a fairly robust way, but also in a very specific way that you do find that commercial marketing leader that you're looking for. Then we did still want to build strong pipelines, make sure that we have continuity risk mitigation, to use a complicated word, but that we figure out how to build pipelines for the right types of people. And very importantly, we wanted to recognize that everyone that works at Philips is relevant and should be developed to the optimum of their abilities. So around this, we built our new approach where we said instead of one leader profile, let's make it business specific. Let's focus on what a specific business needs and work our way back from there. In how to identify talent, we combined performance potential using the 9 box, which probably most companies use by now, performance and potential, and then connected to succession planning, which is very tangible and sort of a validation of the other assessments. If you do have high potential, then you should also show up on those senior roles. If not, then either one is probably not right? So the combination of generic potential, specific succession. We wanted to develop everyone. So rather than focus on specific elitist programs, we said let's focus on building strong foundation, solid development processes that apply for everyone, so that everyone has a development conversation. We recognize different needs for development. Let's make it personalized. Talked about that. Let's not have the 2 by 2 by 2, but do critical experience. Now, what that means is that you look at what a role needs. So if you are the commercial leader of the Belgian market, it's 100 meters across the street from here, you need to do certain things to be successful in your role. Now, those are the experiences that make you successful. Let's use that as the reference point and be more flexible in how you get there. Can be doing a smaller, similar job. Can also be something very different, because people are different, they have different paths, but having that reference, that helped. And then focus more on the leader as coach, but also as decision maker, involve them more strongly. Now, I've talked about this a couple of times in settings a bit like this, a little bit less like a movie theater. But most companies have something like this. So when I talk about this, lots of people say, yeah, we have that already. Right? Same here. Who has something like this, where they develop everyone? Pretty much, right? So, while good for us, and we did track whether it worked, right? So we tracked the results, and we did see a lot of positive results. So we saw that now 95% of our organization is actively participating in these development dialogues. A lot more roles are being filled through succession plans, and the ones that aren't, and this is also interesting, are often filled by targeted recruitment. HVT stands for high value target. We also took out a lot of money. So if you are managing HR departments, you know that this is always a big issue, right? You have to show productivity year on year. We took out a lot of capacity. All these local talent managers eating up a lot of money. We loved them, but they weren't so effective. So all in all, this slide we used to show that our approach worked. It shows you that the corporate HR structure works. If we would do a survey among Philips managers today, and we'd ask them, how about the talent approach for Philips? How well do you like the talent approach for Philips? What do you think they'll say? The typical response is, yeah, we had a good thing going with the high potentials, but HR took it away. They pushed it all back to managers. So I have no clue what we're doing now. Pretty disappointing, right? Why is that? Exactly. That was the big question. So why is it that managers, even though this looks great, right? There's no denying it. It's an approach that works. If you talk to the experts, this is what we're all doing. But how come managers don't see that, right? So what's really the thing that's bugging? So when we were analyzing this, we had a couple of things that came up as like, this is relevant and interesting for when you do design for talent management. So first, I'll talk about all four quickly. How well can you predict the future? So if you know where you're going and your business is quite stable, it's also relatively doable to identify talents that you need a couple of years down the road, right? For me, I work for IT now, and one of the key things for IT is moving from automation of processes to being part of the propositions that Philips has. So the digital propositions, connected toothbrush, subscription for your razor blade. These are really IT solutions that are part of what we sell to customers. Now, it's not typically what an IT crowd does, right? So very different people moving into this new space. It's also a space that we know very, very little about. So our ability to predict what we need in 5 years, 0. So our approach needs to be different than having this, planning approach 5 years out. What we actually do is we ask people, how would you do this? And then the person that has the best story, we hire them, and we let them figure it out. Anyway, so how well can you predict the future? Very important. And based on that, you can decide how far you want to do your planning. With the obvious benefit, if you plan ahead, you can do much more about development, right? But we have to be clear about how far we can do that. Who decides? So who ultimately makes the decision to move people? For Philips, which is a bit of a confederate model, that decision-making power is low in the organization. So a manager decides who comes into their department. And then the whole, moving people around doesn't work so well, because that manager will always think, yeah, but I need that experience now. I need this person to hit the ground running. I think the Dutch army does this differently. They move people around. So when you're a manager in the Dutch army, you just get someone that their corporate has given you. And if you have that approach, then a 2x2x2 can work really well, because then you can actively move people around and you're not confined by this short-term behavior that individual hiring managers will have. But again, depends on what your company's like, what works best for you. How should HR contribute? I think this is always a key question, right? So the trend in the world, basically, is let's push it onto managers. It's better if managers are responsible. And very often that's the case. But I think that the real question is it better if you make the manager responsible but they don't do it? Or if it happens but HR does it? Not the manager. It's a difficult question. I think if we want to push the organization, it's always a fine balance, right? Of course, it makes more sense if you have managers that pick that up. But if they don't, then ultimately it's in the better interest of the company if you do a little bit more push. And especially if you move into uncharted areas, my experience is that we often rely a little bit more on HR to get things going, start pushing things. Not just facilitate process, but really get involved in what is needed. And then the last one, where do you create the value? So very often in corporate HR discussions, we talk about maybe we need some new competencies, right? New strategy, let's redefine the competencies. Let's sharpen the approach a little bit more. If we looked at the full value chain of HR, right, all the way from corporate HR, inventing something, deploying it, to HR, to managers below, to the ultimate interaction between the employee and the manager, very often the bottleneck is not the supremacy of your approach. Right? So investing more in an even better theory can be good, but often it doesn't really add so much to the ultimate impact. Right? Very often it's much more about where is the ownership for the real driving of the development conversations. Where can you make sure that people get more involved, spend more time? And maybe then the solution isn't so sexy, but it's still more effective. So what we ultimately came up with that for us, what works, is first have a robust core. So something that is standardized and works for all of your company. This is just basics, right? So it really helps if you have global tooling and you have global processes, right? Because then everybody is forced to do things the same way. There's this foundation that takes people through the right steps. And then it helps if you have good data, right? Lots of cloud solutions these days offer global solutions that you can quickly adopt, roll out. It's a bit of pain in rolling it out, but once you have it, I have it now sort of on my mobile phone. I have all the talent data of all the people in Philips right here, plus lots of analytics that I can use. So having that is a great enabler. Having the right transparency is also, we found, very good. So for instance, Philips shares succession plans and PP grid placements. I've noticed that that's not the same for all companies, right? So you don't always tell people you're on this succession plan for that reason, you're here in the grid. We found that if you do that, it cultivates a healthy discussion. Right? Because the people that work for us, they're not stupid. They know what's going on, and they appreciate a clear discussion. They would rather know that they're not on a succession plan than being kept in the dark. So that works for us. So this is all foundation. This is all having the basics, and you drive value by optimizing it. Creating operational excellence, making sure there's process adoption, measuring. But where it doesn't work is where your company needs to take risks. So where you need to choose talent over experience. And usually in talent management, that's what it's all about. It's not about creating the optimal labor market of supply and demand. It's about people being willing to invest in talent. So how do you get that? That was always the big question. And what we saw there is that actually works differently than the bottom piece. The bottom piece you can drive from the center for the whole company. Works well. The top piece depends on ownership. So where can you make sure that managers feel the optimal ownership for developing their people? And what we found is that very often that is not a global process. So when we looked at the old way of managing high potentials, in theory that could work, right? If you identify the right high potentials, people are constantly willing to take risks on people from different parts of the organization. But in practice, for us, it didn't, because people weren't willing to take that risk. So we asked ourselves, where are people willing to take that type of risks? And we noticed that that is usually in areas where they feel ownership. So for instance, with Italy, we had a program 2 years ago where they said, no, we do want to focus on our high potentials. We want to accelerate our high potentials. So we took some of the elements that we had in the old program, which is early identification, but not so early. We mapped it to succession planning so that we had that validation. And then we said, okay, what worked really well in that old program? That was manager exposure to talents. And we set up a program that was much smaller in scope. It was just for Italy. But it was super relevant because it was the Italian managers talking to the Italian talents. And it was just a one-off iteration. So identify them once for these roles, develop them, bam. Worked like a charm. Everybody loved it. And the people quickly started moving up because these managers started seeing talents, not resumes, and were willing to take risks on them. And they were also the people that were taking the actual risk because it was their succession plans and the plans in their departments that they were talking about. So within that confined space of Italy, this approach worked really well because of ownership. Because they felt, I own this, I'm invested in it, I'm not doing it for corporate, I'm doing it because it makes sense. Next year, we tried to combine it, which is what you always do, right? If it works, you try to scale it. So we combined Italy with France. Guess what happened? Didn't work. All the ownership was gone because all the relevance was gone. People felt that was now a corporate initiative. French managers weren't connecting so well to the Italian talents. The day after an initiative, it became an uphill battle to maintain contact between talent and managers because this small space that we created in Italy, which had super relevance, was suddenly gone. So that got us thinking maybe it's better if you need to have the bottom, but if you want to have the top part, so institutionalized risk-taking in your organization, it actually works better to do it where people feel optimal ownership. So what we have now is this still robust core, but we have more of a portfolio of different parts of Philips doing things differently, which feels super awkward from a corporate HR point of view. Right? We don't like that. And we always feel that we need to combine it, make it one. But that doesn't work so well. It works better if you focus on, where the rubber hits the road, which is their ownership for risk-taking. And that is with these different programs. So what can you then do as corporate HR? Is support this. Help them say, okay, if you want this, then we have this practice, use it if you want, don't if you don't want to. And in having that more agile approach and having sort of this bi-modular approach to total talent management, we feel we've found something that works a little bit better than the previous two occasions. So that's what I wanted to share with you guys.